Hello WHS! Here we are again for more MCA review. This MCA review has to do with bar graph distortion. So things you have to watch out for, how we can see if bar graphs are being distorted, if what we are seeing on the graph is accurate. Okay, what we're going to start with is just some data. This data is all about inner-city passenger travel, and we have top three things here. This transportation is air, bus, and subway, and passengers in millions who use that. So notice air is the highest, then bus, then subway. If we look at this bar graph, we see it's just in descending order. It's actually a Pareto chart. It's another type of bar graph. But we have air, bus, subway, and if we notice, we start at 0 and we go right to this 363, 348 on this one, 274.6 on this one. This graph is great. Other than it needing some labels about transportation and passengers in millions, this graph is good. It's not skewing the data in any sort of way. It's representing the data as it should be represented. What we see is all three are pretty heavily used. They're not too different. Air is definitely the biggest. Yeah, that's what I can see from this graph. This is a good graph. Now, let's look at this graph compared to two others. I'm going to go ahead and carry this one down. Here's another graph of the same information. What do these graphs have in common? Well, let's look at the order. It goes air, bus, and subway. Same order. And if we look at the scales, we're still going from 0 to 400, counting by 40s. Okay, what is the difference? Well, notice the width in the bars. The air bar is a lot skinnier than the bus. And that one's even bigger than the subway. So why is this misleading? Well, hopefully you can look and say, it looks misleading because the bus bar looks way bigger than the air one. It may not be taller, but because it's so wide, it seems like this is taking up more data. The bus looks like the biggest one because it has the biggest area. Okay, or even the subway looks a little bit bigger than the air if you look at the area. So this one is skewed. It's not proportionally correct because of the widths of the bars. So don't be fooled by that. Let's make sure that when we look at graphs, they have the same widths. That should help us. We really should be looking at the height. The air does have the highest numerical value. Subway has the lowest numerical value. Okay? The bus is not twice as big as the subway, or even bigger because the bar looks that way. That doesn't make it true. So let's keep that stuff in mind. One more type of bar graph distortion that you might see is a bar graph that looks like this. Please notice the change is, you guys see this little break in the axis? This broken axis is kind of like when you were little, if you'd ever count, 1, 2, skip a few, 99, 100, you just skip a few in the middle. Okay, that's what this graph is doing. It's saying 0, skip a few, 260. So we just skipped from 0 to 260. It's a broken axis. We skipped a whole bunch of data. Be watching out for that. So technically, our air is still at that 263, and our bus is still at the 348 or whatever it was, and subway is still at 274 or whatever it was. They're accurate with their numerical values. That is true this time. Their numerical values are accurate, and the width of the bar is the same. Okay, technically this is an okay graph, but what we have to realize is because we skipped a few, it can look distorted, and it can look like something that we have to think about before we answer a question on. For example, air is not 4 times as big as subway. Not 4 times as many people used air transportation than they used subway transportation. That's not true. If we look at the real graph where we didn't skip any, subway is definitely not 4 times, or air is not 4 times as big as Subway. Do you see that? Subway is much more comparable with air. It's still true here, but because we're zoomed in on just this top half, this graph is just this part of the graph. They zoomed in, they skipped all of this stuff, and it made it look like Subway was so much smaller than the other two. So that's another type of bar graph distortion that you have to watch out for. The graph isn't technically wrong, you just have to know how to read it. And watching out for those broken axes and realizing, hey, the difference here is actually not that much in the grand scheme of things. Okay? So those are a couple types of bar distortions that you should watch out for when reading graphs and having to interpret graphs.